The rain outside Daniel's apartment window had been falling for hours, drumming softly against the glass like a reminder that time was still moving, even if his life wasn't. The air inside was heavy, thick with the smell of instant noodles and burnt coffee. Unopened bills lay scattered across the small wooden table, some stacked neatly, others crumpled from frustration. His laptop sat in the middle of it all, screen cracked, cursor blinking on an empty document that said Business Plan V7. Daniel rubbed his temples, his eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights. He was only 28, but he felt decades older. His first restaurant had been a disaster, a bright little burger joint he'd poured his life savings into. It closed within 6 months after a food inspection went wrong. Then came the clothing brand, an online store he believed would redefine street fashion. It barely made 5 sales before he ran out of money for ads. Then there was the delivery app, his big idea. That one died before it ever launched, thanks to a data breach and a dishonest partner. Each failure had carved a little deeper into him. The excitement that once fueled him was gone, replaced by a dull ache that whispered, maybe they're right. His friends had stopped calling after the third business went under. When they did see him, they smiled politely, but with that familiar look, pity mixed with disbelief. His parents had stopped asking about his projects and started sending him job listings instead. Just take something stable. Daniel, his mother had said over the phone last week, you're smart, but dreams don't pay the rent. He wanted to argue, but she was right. His rent was 3 weeks late, his fridge nearly empty. The landlord had left another warning note on the door. He looked around the apartment, the peeling wallpaper, the broken chair, the one good suit hanging in the corner like a relic from better days, and for the first time, he wondered if this was it, if maybe this was how people stopped dreaming, not suddenly, but slowly. Like a fire running out of oxygen, he picked up one of the old business cards from his failed ventures. Daniel Reeves, founder and CEO. He laughed bitterly. CEO of nothing, he muttered. He closed his eyes, remembering the laughter of people who once promised to support him. Friends who had shared his posts when he was starting out, only to disappear when things went wrong. But beneath all the pain and humiliation, something inside him still refused to die. It wasn't hope, not exactly, but a small, stubborn spark that whispered, you're not done yet. He didn't know what his next step would be, or if there even was one. But he knew one thing for sure. If life had beaten him down this far, there had to be a reason he was still standing. He looked out the window at the rain-soaked streets of Chicago, lights reflecting in the puddles like tiny pieces of broken dreams. Somewhere deep inside, he made a quiet promise that someday, somehow, he'd turn this failure into something meaningful. And as he whispered those words to himself, the city kept raining, washing away yesterday's failures, one drop at a time. Pure hub kindness. The next morning, Daniel left his apartment early, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his worn-out jacket. The cold Chicago air bit at his cheeks, and the streets were already alive with the noise of ambition. People rushing to offices, delivery trucks honking, coffee shops buzzing with chatter. He walked with no destination, just trying to escape the weight of his thoughts. His phone was silent, no job offers, no messages from friends, only reminders of overdue bills and rejected applications. As he passed by a small cafe on the corner of Belmont Avenue, he slowed down. Through the fogged-up glass, he could see a group of college students sitting around a table, laughing loudly. He couldn't hear their exact words at first, but one sentence caught his attention. Everyone online keeps talking about success, one of them said between laughs. It's always millionaires giving advice, never anyone who actually failed. The others chuckled, nodding in agreement. Yeah, because no one wants to admit they messed up. Failure doesn't sell. Daniel froze. Their laughter faded into the background as something in his mind clicked. Failure doesn't sell, but maybe it should. He kept walking, but those words wouldn't leave him. He thought about all the podcasts he had listened to, confident voices telling stories of success, of strategies that worked, of secrets that supposedly guaranteed greatness. But none of them ever talked about the dark side. None of them told people how to deal with falling flat on your face over and over again. By the time he reached home, an idea had started to take shape, strange, but alive. What if, instead of hiding his failures, he talked about them? What if someone out there needed to hear that they weren't alone in their struggle? He looked at his old, cracked laptop on the desk. The microphone he used for video calls was still there, dusty but functional. He hesitated. Who would listen to him? He was no success story, no millionaire, just a guy who had failed more times than he could count. But maybe that was exactly why his voice mattered. That night, Daniel sat down and opened a new recording app. His hands trembled as he clicked record. For a moment, he couldn't speak. The silence in the room felt too loud. Then, slowly, he began. Hi, my name is Daniel Reeves, he said, his voice uncertain, and I've failed. A lot. This isn't a success story. Not yet. This is the story of how I'm still trying. He spoke for nearly an hour about the restaurant that shut down, the online store that tanked, the app that broke him financially. He didn't sugarcoat anything. He spoke about the nights he cried, the days he almost gave up, and the quiet moments when no one believed in him, not even himself. When he was done, He named the episode The Failure Project, Episode 1. Starting from rock bottom, he uploaded it to a free podcast platform, expecting nothing. No views, no comments, no hope. He closed his laptop, leaned back in his chair, and sighed. Well, he whispered to the empty room, at least I tried one more time. As the city lights blinked through his window, Daniel didn't know that this one act of honesty, this small, trembling voice in the dark, was about to change everything. The next morning, Daniel woke up to the sound of a notification pinging from his old phone. Then another, and another. He frowned, rubbing his eyes. His first thought was that it must be spam, maybe some app updates or payment reminders. But when he unlocked the screen, his heart stopped. There were emails, dozens of them. Subject lines read things like, "Thank you for saying what I couldn't, and your podcast made me cry." His eyes widened as he opened the first one. "Daniel," it said, "I listened to your episode last night. I failed my business too. Everyone told me to quit, but hearing your story made me realize it's okay to start again. Thank you." He scrolled through more messages from people in different countries, in different time zones, all saying the same thing. "You made me feel less alone." Some were students who had flunked out of school. Others were small business owners, artists, even single parents, trying to make it through hard days. His words, his pain had somehow reached them. Daniel sat in silence for a long time, the laptop screen glowing softly in the early morning light. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a failure. He felt seen, heard, understood. That evening, he recorded a second episode. His voice was steadier this time, more confident. He spoke about what failure teaches: patience, humility, perspective. He told his listeners that falling down doesn't mean you're broken. It means you're still moving. He ended the recording with a quiet line. Maybe the world doesn't need more people talking about success. Maybe it needs more people talking about how to survive failure. He uploaded it and went to bed with a strange feeling. Not anxiety, not hope, exactly, but something peaceful. The next day, the listener count had doubled. A week later, tripled. Within a month, The Failure Project had over 10,000 downloads. People began tagging him on social media, sharing quotes from his episodes. One post read, "I used to be ashamed of failing. Now I see it as training." Daniel Reeves, The Failure Project. The comments below were filled with people sharing their own stories, missed opportunities, broken dreams, restarts. It was no longer just a podcast. It was a community. Daniel spent hours responding to every message he could. Each one reminded him that his failures weren't wasted, they were seeds. Seeds that had finally begun to grow. He set up a small corner in his apartment as his studio, a wooden desk, a cheap microphone stand, and a sticky note on the wall that said, "Keep failing forward." Every time he recorded, he spoke like he was talking to an old friend, someone who just needed to hear, "You're not alone in this." Soon, small sponsors reached out. A motivational blog featured his story. Invitations came from universities asking him to speak to young entrepreneurs. Daniel couldn't believe it. People were now paying him to talk about the very thing that had once made him hide in shame. Looking out his window one night, watching the Chicago skyline glitter in the dark, Daniel smiled to himself. The same city that had witnessed his breakdown was now witnessing his rise, not through success, but through honesty. And for the first time in his life, Daniel didn't just feel like he was surviving. He felt like he was becoming someone who could help others survive too. Months passed, and The Failure Project was no longer just a podcast. It had become a movement. Daniel's name began circulating across social media, tagged in videos, blogs, and motivational pages. People shared clips of his words over cinematic music, each line striking a chord. "You're not defined by how many times you fall. You're defined by how many times you get back up." The once forgotten man from Chicago was now being invited to schools, business seminars, and online talk shows. Yet, Daniel never tried to sound like a guru. He wasn't selling perfection, he was sharing truth. He spoke the way he always had, raw, humble, and deeply real. That authenticity became his superpower. His first live event was held in a modest community hall on the city's west side. He expected maybe 20 people to show up. When he arrived, the line stretched around the block. Young entrepreneurs, single parents, students, people from all walks of life had come to see the man who dared to say that failure wasn't shameful. As he stood backstage, Daniel's hands trembled. His mind flashed back to the dark days, the unpaid bills, the empty fridge, the quiet nights when he thought he'd never be enough. And now, here he was, about to speak to hundreds of people who saw hope in him. He took a deep breath and whispered to himself, "You failed your way here. Don't forget that." When the host called his name, the room erupted in applause. Daniel stepped onto the stage under the warm glow of the lights. The moment felt unreal. He paused for a second, looked at the crowd, and smiled. "I used to think my story was over," he began, "but it turns out, failure was just the first chapter." The audience listened in complete silence. Some nodded, some wiped away tears. He told them about his restaurant that went under, about losing every dollar he had, about how he once recorded a podcast in a dark apartment because he had nothing left to lose. But more than that, he told them what each failure had taught him, how resilience is born not from success, but from surviving disappointment. After the talk, people lined up to meet him. One young woman said, "You made me believe that my mistakes don't define me." An older man added, "You helped me forgive myself." Daniel shook every hand, grateful beyond words. Soon after, he expanded the failure project into workshops, online mentoring, and even a small publishing venture where others could share their own failure stories. He hired a small team, people who, like him, had stumbled and fallen but refused to quit. Together, they turned what once seemed like a personal tragedy into a global message of healing and courage. As his influence grew, Daniel made one promise to himself: no matter how big the failure project became, he would never pretend to have it all figured out. Because the truth was, he was still learning, still failing, still growing. That night, sitting in his small office surrounded by letters from listeners around the world, Daniel smiled at the thought that kept echoing in his heart. I used to fail alone. Now, I'm helping others fail forward. The night of Daniel's biggest event arrived, a packed auditorium in downtown Chicago. The very city that had once buried his dreams now blazed his name in glowing letters across the marquee. The Failure Project, Live with Daniel Reeves. He stood backstage, staring at the words on the giant screen, and smiled quietly. There was a time he couldn't afford a bus ticket, and now people had flown across states just to hear him speak. The crowd buzzed with anticipation, students clutching notebooks, entrepreneurs with hopeful eyes, and people who looked just like he once did, tired, scared, but unwilling to give up. As the lights dimmed, the host introduced him with a voice full of pride. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the man who turned failure into a business, Daniel Reeves." Thunderous applause filled the room. Daniel stepped into the spotlight, his heart pounding, his palms slightly sweaty. But as he looked out over the sea of faces, he felt something powerful: peace. This wasn't fame, it wasn't luck. It was the result of every fall, every humiliation, every night he'd spent talking into a broken microphone when no one was listening. He began softly, his voice calm but resonant. "When I started the Failure Project, I didn't have a plan. I just had pain and a microphone." The crowd chuckled gently, nodding. "But I learned something. Pain, when shared, becomes power." He walked slowly across the stage, telling them stories not about success, but about the messy middle parts, the rejections, the doubt, the moments when you question your worth. "We live in a world obsessed with winning," he said, "but no one tells you that even winners lose before they learn how to win." On the screen behind him appeared clips of his journey: the broken-down apartment, the early podcast setup, his first event. The audience watched in silence as his life flashed before them, a living testament to the truth that failure isn't the opposite of success, but part of it. Then Daniel paused and looked straight at the crowd. "Every failure," he said slowly, "was a brick. I just had to learn how to build with them." The room erupted in applause. People stood, clapping through tears. The sound filled the hall like thunder, echoing off the walls. And for a moment, Daniel had to look down to keep from crying. The boy who once couldn't pay rent had built something far greater than wealth. He had built meaning. When the noise faded, he added softly, "Don't hide your scars. They're proof that you tried. They're proof that you're still fighting." The screen behind him lit up with those exact words in bold white letters. "Never be ashamed of your scars. They're proof that you tried." As the event ended, Daniel stepped off stage, surrounded by people thanking him, hugging him, telling him how the Failure Project had changed their lives. He felt no pride, no arrogance, only gratitude, because he knew something few understood. Success built from failure has roots that never die. That night, as the city lights shimmered through the glass windows of his hotel room, Daniel turned on his recorder one last time. "This is Daniel," he said with a smile, "and you're watching Pure Hub Kindness, where every failure finds its meaning." And with that, he closed his eyes, knowing he had finally turned his pain into purpose. Pure Hub Kindness.